did you watch my video about black people?
I've seen a few of your videos. Yes.
Actually, I'm sorry if you feel offended. But the video is not referring to all the entire black people. Some black people.
I understand what you mean. So I'm not offended at all. No offense.
As a matter of fact, I've never been to Japan, and I'm gonna come in like September, October.
Oh, really? Maybe
Yeah.
have a drink.
Let's have a good time. Like that smile, man. That's a good smile. You know what I mean?
So I reached out to you because I saw your video and I was very impressed, by the way. Like it was questions like Japanese people have for black people. And I commended your courage because just growing up and living in Asian culture, I noticed a lot of Asians they're very polite. Japanese are very polite. They don't want to take a risk and ask questions like that.
ありがとうございます。よろしくお願いします。
私はブルシンです。こんにちは。That's all I know. That's all I know in Japanese.
So where do you live now?
I've been in the U.S. in the Northeast for about 7 years, almost 8 years now.
No, there's no oppression like that we think of. We think about oppression. The white man has his foot on your neck. You can't get anywhere in life because of white people. That's just not the reality anymore. The truth is the days of being oppressed simply because of your skin color by white people, that's a long, long time ago. And even back then, it wasn't just white people. It was rich people that had the money to be able to purchase slaves. And that was not relegated to just white people. You had black people that owned slaves. You had Native Americans that owned slaves. That's just what it was. It was a matter of rich versus poor, not even about skin color all the way. Of course, there was racism a lot back then, but not so much anymore. That's a thing of the past. It's used as an excuse as to why we can't move forward.
People from all races can be prejudiced and can be racist. So I think there's always going to be that. But as far as racism and oppression, nobody's getting in my way from doing what I want to do. Right? Like if I want to, like now there might be I might go and apply certain places and they might not hire black people, but there are laws against that. If I can prove that I was qualified and they didn't hire me because I was black, because I was a woman, then I can sue them. It's because there are laws against discrimination in this country. If they're systematically trying to keep me down, like nobody stopped me from going to college. Nobody stopped me from going to teach in Taiwan. I don't feel like there's anything I can't do if I wanted to do it. Some people, and I don't know why I'm not affected by it and some people are. I'm trying to put my finger on that.
I don't think anybody in the United States nowadays is oppressed. I think there's obviously like poverty, for example, but it is also possible for people to climb out of the poverty levels, even though it may be difficult. There are endless opportunities in the United States. Really silly, and I think it's actually hurtful when people tell, like, say, minorities or black people, for example, that they're oppressed, and it just gives people get into a very negative mentality. And I want people to think of it this way: when you tell somebody that they can't win or they're kind of bound to fail because they're oppressed, there's oppressors and the oppressed, there's really no point in trying hard to succeed because you already think that you're not going to win. Plenty of people, the most powerful person in the world for 8 years was a black man. I don't think black people are specifically oppressed because that wouldn't be able to happen. Like, why would a black person be able to be in control of the United States? That doesn't make any sense. Definitely not. I definitely don't think that. Of course, there's little pockets of racism. There's always going to be racism. That should not hold anybody back. That should not hold any black person back, even if there's somebody that is being racist towards them. It's like, you know what? You do better, or you go and take another route. There are opportunities in so many different places. You don't have to just feel like there's no way out.
I do not think so at all. I do not think they are oppressed. I think that they may experience prejudice from individual people, but I do not think, no, that's firm no, that I do not think that they are being oppressed. Not just lived in the Northeast, I have traveled a bit. I haven't really been in the South, but apparently it's even better in the South now compared to the North. I've had people tell me that in terms of race relations, I never thought that I was being discriminated against. It just never entered my mind for almost 5 years. If it were so, I would have been able to come to that conclusion on my own. Like that would have been very obvious to me, and I would have really thought about those things. If you have been raised to look for certain things or taught that when someone does one thing, the reason they're doing it is because they don't like you, which I think is what a lot of, because of your race, which is what I think a lot of, I don't like saying African Americans, but Black people who grew up in the US have been taught to believe, then you will see that. So I think it's a matter of perspective. That is what I think. And I think that nowadays, what people call oppression is they define that by not seeing the same outcomes for different groups, not by actually being able to measure how people are being treated differently in the moment, like the actual interaction between two individuals. But just when you look at the numbers, there is a difference. And so this must be due to people being oppressed. That's basically what's going on now, because they've removed a lot of the laws that were actually oppressing Black people in the US for a long time. However, they're not getting the results that they want. So they call that oppression.
We get a lot of preferential treatment. There's all kind of things. You have a thing called EEOC, that's an Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. Let's say you are a Fortune 500 company, you're a big company. You must have a certain ratio of races in your company, or else you're going to get a fine. You may get a letter sent to you by the federal government. So there's actual laws on the books that say that you must have a certain number of Black people. And then EEOC as well. That's affirmative action I was talking about, but EEOC as well. If you get fired from a job, you may be able to sue your employer because you're Black, because you could say it's racial discrimination. Well, how do you prove it? It doesn't really take that much to prove it. So sometimes you have employers that have to pay people just because they fired them, because they just happened to be Black, even if there wasn't a reason. The person could have been a bad employee, always late, not doing a good job, not a good fit for the company, but it doesn't matter. You have a lot of rules and regulations that work in our favor because of the perceived racism. The victimhood narrative a lot of times is pushed to get even more rules, even more unfair advantages for people that happen to not be white. Matter of fact, I'm gonna say this. It's not just Black folks. It's those that are not white or straight white males. If you are a gay male, that's fine. If you are a female, it doesn't matter, white, Black, or whatever, that's fine. If you are a straight white male, you get nothing. That's why Black Lives Matter has become part of the LGBT community, because they get more benefits, okay? Because you're Black and you may be gay, lesbian, transgender. So let's say you're a transgender, gender non-conforming Black person who's a liberal, you get everything you want.
Some people say, discrimination like racial profiling, in a traffic, still exists or something like that. What do you think?
They exist for a reason. Stereotyping and profiling exists because of patterns. And there's a lot of patterns that happen. Like, say, if you want to, let's say, for example, if you're a police officer and if you wanted to get a lot of arrests, if you wanted to write a lot of tickets, you would know to go to the bad neighborhoods. And a lot of bad neighborhoods have Hispanic or Black communities, and it's going to be easier for you to get something. It's just it's a sad reality, and it's just like, say, in Arizona. I lived in Arizona for a little while too, and they have a huge immigration problem because Arizona is connected to Mexico, and so a lot of the cops will discriminate. I'm not saying it's right, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, there's a higher chance that they're gonna pull over someone who's illegal, somebody who's not there. So that's kind of how they operate. I don't 100% want to call it racism. I think it's just like, if there was a pattern for white people, if there was a certain type of criminal pattern, they would profile in that way too. I've been pulled over wrongfully a few times, but the thing is, I wasn't doing anything illegal, so I was let go and nothing happened. Some police officers could be trained better, and some of them are a little bit too aggressive, and some of them do some shady things every once in a while. But if you're following, and respecting the law for the most part, you'll be okay. Even when I got pulled over wrongfully, I was okay. It might have been inconvenient. That's how things are. And hopefully we can just make things better instead of just trying to be angry all the time.
So why do you think, quite many Black people in the US are still claiming white privilege?
So it's an excuse. It's a reason to say, okay, this person over here, they're white and they have money. And the reason why they have money is because they're white. They don't think about, well, maybe they have money because they worked hard, their parents worked hard, their grandparents worked hard, and they have history in their family of doing things a certain way, which will yield a certain result. We don't think about what we're doing that has us in a certain situation. I think the last numbers I saw was about 77% of Black children are born outside of wedlock. That right there is a problem. When you have a child that's born born to a single mother, they're going to be more likely to be in poverty, dealing with crime, dealing with mental issues, being incarcerated, not being successful when they get older. That right there is a problem. But rather than facing the serious issues that we have in our community amongst ourselves, that we do to each other, we'll rather say, oh, it's the white person's fault, because that is the go-to argument that we use. It's an easy out rather than taking personal responsibility for ourselves.
What's your thoughts on Black Lives Matter?
Oh, Black Lives Matter. Oh, man, I have a lot to say about that. Obama administration sent the DOJ, led by Eric Holder, who was also Black. Obama's Black, of course, as well. And they found out that the whole hands up, don't shoot thing was false. You have videotape saying it was false, but it didn't matter because you had Black Lives Matter primarily and other groups, but mostly Black Lives Matter. They went down there and then they beat the drums of, oh, we got shot because for nothing, for, taking some cigars or whatever. And then you had a white liberal guy who made a documentary about it and added fuel to the fire. So then they go down there, they stoke the flames of dissent, of unrest, of riot, and then you had Ferguson, Missouri basically burned to the ground. And did it do the same thing in Baltimore, Maryland, where Freddie Gray died in the police car? Nobody knows how he really died. There were 6 officers who got put on trial. 3 of them were white, 3 of them were Black. They all got acquitted. Nobody went to jail because nobody really knows how Freddie Gray died. Freddie Gray, I think he was 25 years old, had been arrested 25 times off of drugs. When he was caught that day, when he was in the police car, they said that he had a knife and drugs. He may have ingested the drugs and died that way as some kind of reaction to the drugs in his body. But we don't really know. But it didn't matter. The facts didn't matter. The case didn't matter. Who was involved with the case didn't matter. All they know is that it was police. And then they went over there and they did more of the same. And they got the mayor of Baltimore. At the time, it was Stephanie Rawlings Blake. And she said, we gave them space to destroy. So basically, they allowed Black Lives Matter to come there and do what they did. That empowered them. And then Barack Obama brought them to the White House and said, hey, you guys are doing a great job. I don't understand why he did that. Maybe he was just trying to empower them more. So then they basically became a force of destruction in the country. And one of the guys that's the leader of it, a guy by the name of Demer McKesson, this guy was making $110,000 as a school administrator, and he quit that job to become a full-time protester. So right now, he was living in St. Louis where the Ferguson, Missouri thing happened. He moved from St. Louis to go to Washington, D.C., probably the most expensive place in the country. And he's living in some white liberal big donor guy's house, and he pretty much goes all over the country and makes a living that way. So Black Lives Matter, it started as a force to destroy, then it became a force to make money. And at this point in time, it's like an LGBT organization, because every time you hear from them, it's about some trans affirmation, some lesbian affirmation. So now it basically got assimilated into the LGBT community.
The people, the organizers of Black Lives Matter, the cases that they focus on, they're just sensationalized. They're picked up by the media, and the media runs with the narrative. And you realize that it's not as big of a problem as they're making it out to be. Like, I would be on board. I'm not on board with Black Lives Matter. I'm on board if we want to talk about excessive force and police brutality. We want to try to fix our police force and make them more professional and try to get everybody to do better. I would be totally okay with that. But the thing is, they want to talk about, oh, they're just shooting unarmed Black people, and then that's it. They're acting like that's the only problem. When I remember a lot of people started paying attention to excessive force. I think it was in 2011. I think it was in 2011. There was a guy named Kelly Thomas, a white guy, just like 3 miles from me. Some 2 cops beat him to death, and he was old white, and he's not old, but he was in his 30s. He was mentally handicapped, and he was begging for his dad, and they beat him to death. He died in the hospital. He's not a Black guy. This isn't a Black issue. This is just an issue with some of these cops going too crazy. Who was that guy in Arizona? I think it was Jared Taylor or something. Very recently, there was a guy playing basically Simon Says with the guy. He got shot and killed in the hallway. It was very recently. It was a white guy. And these are stories that, like, they don't get blown up as much because it's not a Black person, right? And then if you look at the statistics, like, a lot of white people get shot by police officers. It's not just Black. It's just that the media focuses on that. So I don't like how they try to act like, oh, it's only a Black issue, because it's not. That's why I never got that mad when people try to say all lives matter, because that's essentially the point. We want to protect all lives. We don't need to single out anybody. We can just talk about excessive force and police brutality. So that was my biggest thing. I just didn't, I don't like how the hostility, how the way they've behaved.
I think think the Black Lives Matter movement was founded on a lie, that is that Black people were being specifically targeted by the police. It has been shown that due to Black Lives Matter, a lot more Black people in the United States have been victims of violent crime because police have had to basically back off in certain areas. I think the focus on police brutality only affecting Black people doesn't make any sense. And I think if they want to talk about police brutality, that's fine. But I don't think it's being focused only on Black people. And I also think that for the people who are Black in the United States do experience discrimination by the police, it's such a small number. I don't know why people are really talking about it. So I think it's almost a continuation because they've had to struggle for so long. They don't know when to stop, or they don't see that actually they've gained what they were fighting for. And now it's time to focus on something else.
You know, the whole thing was police officers were shooting and killing Black people unnecessarily for no reason. So then if you have a riot, you got police on camera beating up people who are Black because they happen to be burning down a store or trying to rob somebody or something like that. It wouldn't look good, and it may cause more riots. So now that the riots have died down, maybe there won't be as many riots because it'd be stopped by the police. And also, it's not really in style anymore. A lot of the riots, it was a trendy thing. It was something fun to do. People were doing it because they were bored. I mean, hey, I had the same reaction you did. It's like, come on. But people are like that. People, you know, especially in America, people just follow whatever is trendy. They go on their phone, they go on Twitter, and they say, hey, they're having a riot. I want to be part of that. I'm a victim too. And then I go back to the whole thing about what you learned from your childhood in the Black household. You're told by your parents, you're told by your teachers, you're told by TV, you're told by your professors in college that you are a victim. It's not your fault, and it's the white man's fault. So when you have an opportunity to go out there and riot, all in the name of fighting against the white man, even if you destroy your own community, it doesn't matter. You still feel like you are justified in doing what you're doing based upon your prior education.
There are a lot of white people that support Black Lives Matter and other races as well. And a lot of the white people are like, there's this weird thing too that's going on here about the white guilt. So in order to control, you have the people that aren't white making the white people feel guilty, but then the white people are like falling for it. And then they're submitting and being like, oh, you know, I'm sorry. And then they'll join the Black Lives Matter and they'll be like, oh, you know, you're a white male. There's this really, like, I was asking if you watch InfoWars, there's this really good clip of these two guys in a crowd, and like Black Lives Matter is on here, and then the other people that are Trump supporters, and then there's a white guy, and he's yelling at this one dude, and he's like, you're a white male, and the guy's like, but you're a white male. I'm like, yeah, this is crazy. You know, there are white people that are falling into the white privilege thing too, and the white guilt. They call it white guilt.
I'm actually concerned about that picture, you know, minorities blaming majority. I'm actually concerned, you know, that might happen in Japan. So in your opinion, what Japan can learn from the race issue in the US?
Well, what Japan can learn is to remain a homogenous country. Do not try to embrace multiculturalism. You know, you guys have your own culture, stick to it. And if anybody wants to come to the country, screen them very well. Don't just let anybody in. Make sure that they're going to learn Japanese language, so they're not going to just be relied upon people that happen to speak English or interpreters, and make sure that they're going to contribute to society. They're not going to come there with no job, with no skill. That's what Japan should absolutely do, because you don't want to have the US where you have too many people that don't really get along. They don't have the same mentality, too many different cultures that exist in the same place. That's going to cause conflict. Also, what you can learn from the US is to not bend your knee to liberalism, to being politically correct. Don't do that. Your culture is your culture. Stick to it. Don't let any outside influences determine how you're going to behave. Behave how you want to behave as Japanese people. Remain a sovereign country. Don't become a place that's going to be a dumping ground for the world's problems like the US has become.
So you think in reality, mixing different races is kind of difficult?
It's difficult. You know, it may work if you have the same culture. If you have the same culture, if you're on the same page mentally, then it may be able to work. But at a certain point, people just come from different worlds. It's too different and people don't get along. Basic small things you take for granted every day that you do, your everyday existence is just not the same in a different place. Like people that come from, let's say, Pakistan, okay, you got Muslims, and then they want to pray 5 times a day. They want to have a mosque blare out the prayer in the open. So let's say a mosque gets built right next to where you live. I mean, do you want to hear prayer 5 times a day? If you are a Muslim, you might want to hear that, but you don't want to hear it. So then you go to the mosque and say, hey, Can you turn off your speakers? Now you got a racial incident happening because they say, oh, you're being racist, even though Islam is not a race, it's a religion, but I digress. Now you got a racial problem. See, that wouldn't happen if people were on the same page. If everybody pretty much had a similar culture, then you wouldn't have issues like that always popping up. So definitely multiculturalism is an experiment that doesn't really work.
One thing that still gets to me, even though I'm way more used to it now, is being in the United States and constantly being asked what my race is. That's something that I never grew up having, and being taught to constantly identify by that beyond like your passport or your license, so like the police can identify you or something. Beyond that stuff, I think that's not good. If you want to create a society that works, that is diverse, then I think you have to have a common culture, even if you are different. Like you can't just have people coming in and having different customs and like ways of like living. I just don't think that will work out long term. I am not against this. There are people who argue strongly against having a diverse nation because they think that it will result in social fragmentation. And I think that that's very, very highly likely to happen, but I don't think it's impossible. And I also think that you're trying to stop human interaction. You know, like you talking to me, I look different from you, but we connected because of something that we were thinking about, similar topics. That you cannot stop that. And that's what causes people to eventually merge together. So I think they're trying to stop a tide that they cannot really stop if you're trying to say like keep people out. Like that's not how human interaction works. It's like individuals beating each other, not some random person saying, well, this isn't going to work out this way, like trying to calculate how things are going to work out in the future.
You know, for Japan to survive, it has to remain Japanese. You know, if you were to replace everyone in Japan with someone from China or someone from, you know, Brazil or wherever, it wouldn't be Japan anymore. It would be a different country. You know, a country is defined by its people, not by the soil. And there's, again, a lot of scientific evidence for this. You take a group of Chinese people and put them in Africa, they're going to build a Chinese community there. You know, some of them might go native, some of them might assimilate a little bit, but a lot of the traits, a lot of the behaviors go with them.